And now we have an uplifting block, somewhat uplifting. We have a positive gun story because it's like Bill Hicks had that whole thing about a positive drug story. Well, you don't hear those too often. What about positive gun stories? You don't hear those too often either. So we have a story this week. A father and son are out, and somebody tried to carjack the wrong people. And Coleon Noir has a small news clip on this because every now and then people who do protect themselves and their families, they need to let other people to do likewise. You are welcome to do likewise. I feel safer when you do likewise. Next one, 100% drop in Afghan opium. What a tragedy. How the CIA propped up the drug trade for years, and they didn't invent that. They took over a franchise run by MI6 and the British Empire. Last clip in this block, former EPA chief debunks the Project 2025 association with the Trump platform, because that has been a major thing. Every time, again, whether it's Biden or Kamala, if Trump is so bad, why in every debate do you have to use 3 or 4 of these dog whistles that are completely not true and only people who don't use their literacy for education believe? The very fine people, and there's two others. So anyway, if he's so bad, why do you have to make stuff up? I ask this question all the time when there's criminals and justice situation, because there is some criminality in the justice system, and to be able to root that out and figure out who the good guys are, who to help, that's not contradictory to our freedom. We have to do discerning learning. So we're going to get to this clip because the person from the EPA, they educate the other side who levels that empty accusation of Trump's going to conduct Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation. By the way, Heritage Foundation made Obamacare. So it's not like some right-wing, Hitler white national supremacy type thing. Okay. It did Obama's healthcare plan that people have. So I don't even like the Heritage Foundation for either of these things, but I respect their ability to be separated from the political candidate who keeps separating himself from the accusations that keep getting leveled in every interview and debate situation. So anyway, we're going to go through this block, and then we'll be back for new juicy stories because we got a lot of other different topics to cover tonight in this episode. Let's get to it.
Police say a shooting just outside the shops at River Center on Tuesday began with a car break-in.
So I want you to imagine this. You're out with your family enjoying a nice day. Maybe did some shopping, you grabbed a bite to eat, and as you were walking back to your car, you see 2 crash dummies breaking into your car. And before you can even process it, these 2 vagabonds are pointing guns at you. Now imagine in that split second, what do? Do you freeze? Do you run? Or do you fight? That's exactly what happened outside the shops at River Center in San Antonio.
Police say it was in this parking lot that a family was leaving the shops at River Center when they saw 2 people trying to break into their car, so they shot at them. Now, this isn't far from the Alamo or the River Walk. We're talking to people. They say they feel that they are safe in this area, but now people coming to park here today, they say they're a little hesitant.
I think I should move my car.
Had we heard about it, we might not have stopped.
Headed downtown to see the Alamo, Ray and Doris Tobias, visiting from Pennsylvania, say they were shocked to hear the news of a shooting.
I think the fact that the culprit was caught makes me a little bit more comfortable.
Police say it happened just after 5 o'clock Tuesday evening when a woman and her family were walking out of the shops at River Center on East Crockett and Bowie. They spotted 2 people breaking into their car and pointing guns at them. That's when authorities say the woman's husband and son shot at the suspects, hitting a man in the face. The suspects would drive off and end up at Baptist Medical Center, where police arrested the woman on a Class C warrant.
Now, I always hear this whenever a story like this breaks out. I usually feel safe in this area. Feeling safe is one thing, but acting like nothing can happen because you feel safe is a recipe for disaster. Criminals usually go to places where people think they're safe because people turn their brain off when they think that they're safe. Just because you feel safe doesn't mean you shouldn't be prepared for unsafe shit to happen. I'm not saying people should walk around paranoid, but you gotta have some awareness. Like in this case, the family was enjoying their day, probably relaxed until boom, reality checks in. What do you do when you're face to face with danger in a safe place? Luckily, in this situation, the son and the father were prepared, and all they had to do was carry their gun. I say this all the time. The idea of carrying a gun is honestly not that daunting. You wake up, you put the gun on you, and you go about your day. You don't have to really think about it until a situation arises. Sure, you want to have situational awareness so that you can see something coming as best you can before it ever happens. But the most basic minor level of preparedness for a self-defense situation is simply putting on a gun and walking out the door. It's not that complicated. Now, here's the thing that really struck me about this story. At first, when I was listening to the story, I was thinking, they shot these fools trying to steal their car. That'll likely kind of get them charged. But because in most states, you can't use lethal force just because someone is jacking your car. But then the twist. Turns out those scumbags had guns pointed at the family. Let me just say, Texas does things a little differently. In most states, you can't use deadly force to protect property. Texas, well, technically you can, but there are very specific limits, like the time of day and how soon you use the lethal force, etc., etc., etc. But this situation, once those guns came out, this wasn't just about the car anymore. The second those two pointed their guns at that family, it became a whole different ballgame. Now we're talking about protecting lives, not just property. And in that moment, the father and son had every right to defend themselves. But here's the cautionary part. Exercising lethal self-defense is not cut and dry. It can be fluid, and I mean very, very fluid. And the rules are different depending on where you are. So you've got to know your state's laws like the back of your hand, unfortunately. The law is not always on your side, even if the moral side might be. What starts as you protecting your property can flip into a deadly force situation real quick. So it's good to understand the distinctions between property defense and self-defense, because the consequences, they can be life-changing. Yes, they were protecting themselves, but it's important to know the laws where you live. This could have easily gone sideways, and for those of us who carry or have a gun at home for self-defense, we need to be prepared not only to act, but to deal with the aftermath legally and mentally. Which is why I'm a proponent of anyone who owns a gun for protection getting some type of self-defense insurance, like the kind you get with the USCCA membership, who sponsors this channel. I like USCCA because you not only get access to self-defense insurance, but also you gain access to an extreme wealth of knowledge about self-defense and the laws in your particular state in one place, along with training. It's freaking invaluable if you ask me, but even if you don't go with USCCA, get something. Because if you're in a self-defense shooting, that could just be the start of your problems. And you don't want to go through that legal process alone. Trust me. So if you're interested in learning more about USCCA, click the link in the description section of this video.
Joining us now is Seth Harp. He is a contributing editor at Rolling Stone, and he's the author of the forthcoming book, The Fort Bragg Cartel, in July of 2025. We're excited to see him. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the reason we booked you is not only because of your forthcoming book subject, but because of a graph that really caught our eye. Let's put this up there on the screen. A lot of perhaps counterintuitive, depending on what you thought about the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. But according to the Financial Times, poppy growing in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, has fallen 99% since the U.S. withdrawal. So, Seth, considering the title of your book, considering a lot of discussion over the last 20 years about opium and the U.S. role in cultivation, poppy and heroin, what do you make of that graph? And considering what you're writing about, what can you shed light on some of the background of why that is?
Well, it's really stunning, and it's only now that the Taliban has been in control of Afghanistan for several years that we're able to fully judge what the true history of the heroin trade in Afghanistan really was and its significance from 2001 to 2021 during the 20 years of U.S. occupation. Before the Taliban took over and completely eradicated the country's entire poppy crop, it was kind of difficult to say who was responsible for that drug production. But actually what the Taliban have just done in 2022 was an exact repeat of something that they did in 2001, which was to eradicate all drug production from Afghanistan, poppy cultivation, and the synthesis of heroin in laboratories. And in the process of writing the book, I learned a lot about the heroin trade in Afghanistan and compiled basically a list of facts that I think every American citizen should know about their government support for international drug cartels, which actually goes back to the 1980s. So I'd be happy to run down, or if you guys just want to ask questions in general about the subject.
Go off.
Go ahead.
Anyway.
Tell us what you got.
Yeah.
Like I said, U.S. U.S. support for drug traffickers in Afghanistan goes back to the 1980s, when the Soviet army occupied Afghanistan. And a lot of people are familiar with the so-called Charlie Wilson's War, America's covert war in Afghanistan to drive out the Soviet occupiers by arming and funding certain warlords to wage guerrilla war in that country against the Russians. And it's also pretty well known that a lot of these people were radical Islamists, and that this covert program led to the formation of Al-Qaeda and the events that led to 9/11 or contributed to it. That was in the background of it. But it's less well known that those same mujahideen, as they're often called, many of them were deeply involved in the drug trade. This is something that we don't hear much about, although it is out there in the open. I think that Steve Cole, writing for the Washington Post in the early 90s, was one of the first to describe this. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Nassim Akhundzada were two of the biggest recipients of CIA cash and arms, and both of them were two of the biggest narcos in Afghanistan. And once the Russians had successfully been driven out, they set about transforming Afghanistan essentially into the world's largest poppy plantation, because the geography and climate of Afghanistan are very advantageous for the cultivation of poppy. And through their brutal methods, they forced a lot of Afghanistan's peasantry into conditions of essentially narco serfdom, and obligated people to plant poppy when in the past they had been planting food crops or fruit. And so the 1990s in Afghanistan is a kind of forgotten interlude, but there was a drug war there, essentially the same as there was a drug war in Colombia, and there is one in Mexico today. And the Taliban actually emerged as a reaction to the infighting between these warlords. And, we hear a lot about the Taliban's wicked ideology and their repression of women and how they don't allow music and kites and things like that. But we never hear about their anti-narcotics agenda. But that was actually fundamental to their ideological identity from the very beginning. The Taliban, as you might imagine, being such a conservative movement, didn't look kindly upon the production of drugs or the consumption of drugs either. And as I alluded to a moment ago, once they had consolidated control of Afghanistan's major population centers after a civil war in the 1990s, they completely eradicated all of the heroin production that was taking place in Afghanistan in 2001. That eradication effort was completed in the summer of 2001. And some experts at the time described it as the most dramatic event in the history of drugs markets. The history of illegal drug markets. They completely decimated the world supply of heroin, eliminated something like 95% of heroin from the global black market. That was, as I said, in summer of 2001.
Seth, let me.
Oh, she was about to pause him too. I didn't plan on commenting on this clip. I heard it earlier this week, but I just heard what he was telling people, and I was like, well, this is a bunch of bullshit. All right, so what he's talking about is something called Operation Cyclone. It starts in 1979. Actually, it starts July 4th, 1979. Zbigniew Brzezinski gives special operational access to Osama bin Laden to start the Mujahideen. Right? There's a whole thing at the beginning of the film, Who Killed John O'Neill? So anyway, that's Operation Cyclone. It starts under Jimmy Carter. It continues under H.W. Bush. It was being run by the CIA, which really took control when Reagan Bush took the White House in 1980. And they run, and what did they say? They had to kick out the Soviets so that they could do what? Continue the opium trade, which is fascinating because we didn't go to war in Afghanistan, which had nothing to do with 9/11 until after the Taliban had wiped out the opium trade. And then the opium trade went skyrocketing. And then we left them with military to take out the opium trade, and they got rid of it again. What's left off of it, because they're talking from the 1980s to present, and there's BCCI, there's all sorts of interesting scandals that go along with this narco history. But what he said was the United States government went and found the narcos who run Afghanistan, and they gave them weapons and arms, and they were able to fight off the Soviets so that they could then continue the opium trade. Now, what's left out is under opium and heroin trafficking. This is a very fascinating history, and once you get into it, you'll learn they don't always use these terms. For instance, it was once called the old China trade. So if you want to go back in the 1800s and research this stuff and find out who is they, them, those that's starting all this stuff in the first place, you got to look up the different terms. Now, if you wanted like a full spectrum history, I got a book here for you. It's called Dope Inc., Britain's Opium War Against the World. And since the British had a first, second, and third Anglo-Afghan war, right? They like America's 20 years is just us doing our time because Britain's been doing it for a couple hundred years over there in Afghanistan. And there's an older version of this book. It's much thicker. It had a different subtitle, but they do have quite an impressive graphic on the front that has held the test of time. So you could become educated at a higher than Rolling Stone level of education, right? When Breaking Points is bringing, they're like, here's an expert from Rolling Stone. Yeah, but you could also you could draw more expertise by doing a couple searches on CorbettReport.com and learn all about the history of Al Qaeda and the Mujahideen and the opium trade and the British Empire. It's like, it is not something exclusive to my research. I'm not the only one who has noticed this. I mean, the people who wrote this book, they knew all about it in the 70s because this book was originally published in the 80s, and then they made fun of these people on Saturday Night Live. They did a whole skit with Kissinger, and it's John Lovitz, and somebody plays the Queen of England because, there's a thing that's gone on since 1600, since Queen Elizabeth I discovered some special herbs and spices from the Far East. The British has been over there a lot. And that's part of the history of America was tied to that until we had a revolution. And then some of the families on the eastern coast of this country stayed loyal to the British the whole time. They drew a lot of wealth from that narco-terrorism. And those are the same founding families of Central Intelligence Agency and OSS and a whole bunch of State Department type stuff. So when there's talk about a deep state or the Eastern establishment, I mean, the Eastern establishment is an official term. And if you don't know, let me just type in, I'll type it in over here so you can see. EASTERNEST. Can I do it without my glasses? Eastern establishment, families and power structure. All right, so there is an actual group called the America's Eastern Establishment, and it was which Roosevelt that coined the phrase. I'll have to come up with it, but it's like Roosevelt's sister, Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, came up with the phrase, the Eastern Establishment, as a group of families. And a lot of these families are loyal to the British Empire and took money from the British East India Company, and are part, some of them in the Boston area, the Boston Brahmins, the first families of Boston. Super powerful families that own shipping companies and islands and slaves. I once worked for somebody who had the last name Cabot. I walked into his office. He had a picture of a yacht in front of an island. And my buddy said, "Is that your boat?" This is the guy right here. And the guy said, "Yes, and that's my island." Okay. So when you get to the Lowell family, the Cabot family, and the rest of the first families of Boston that were the families that continued to be loyal to the heroin and opium trade, the slave trades that they had. Okay, so this is still going on. These people had grandkids that are having trust funds in our government and intelligence agencies right now. So anyway, there's a lot more to it. I just want to let you know that type of history is available, and people who are Grand Theft World members, they have access to this history blueprint, and you can search it. Just like you guys can search Clip Genie over on the grandtheftworld.com to find clips out of our episodes. Scott, was that all on your radar?
I mean, so some of the nuance that you just got into, like some of the history of the families, no, that's really interesting stuff. I gotta dig into that. And it's been on my to-do list forever to read Drug Inc. or Doping, excuse me. Yeah, you talk about that a lot, and that's definitely something I want to immerse myself in. But I think, just the whole Afghani opium production rabbit hole is such a huge red pill for so many different issues. Like, and this is just on Wikipedia. This isn't like conspiracy. It says opium production in Afghanistan is the Wikipedia entry. It just says in July 2000, Taliban leader Mullah Muhammad Omar collaborating, and they basically they made it illegal to produce poppy fields. Right. So in 2000, guys, right? They made it illegal to produce poppies and opium and all that stuff. So they said no more of that, guys. We're trying to change things around here. Well, of course, something happened in 2001, not long after that, and we go into Afghanistan, and it says by November 2001, like less than 2 months after the incident in 2001, due to the
Open for
collapse of the
business.
economy. They're way back open for business, and we're back to cranking out opium narcotics out of Afghanistan. So it's like, you can't tell me that that was an unintentional outcome of the invasion of Afghanistan. Like, it's just like, it's just shocking.
There's a demographic of people, and they're like, 9/11 happened, and then we went into Afghanistan in October. And I'd say, that's interesting. You guys had logistics and equipment and camouflage, all this stuff ready just in a month? That's amazing. You can move all that stuff around in a month. Did you follow any of the work orders for, moving that stuff around? Hey, did you know that on October 6th, the president signed a whole authorization for the invasion of Afghanistan before 9/11 even happens? Did you know about that? Did they sweep that under the rug with you on your news station, whatever you're getting poisoned by every day in your toxic mind soup going on? You become immune to it when you know more facts than that argument. But if you don't, you're subservient to whatever that gaslighting is, right?
Yeah.
So it's like making things gaslighting proof. We need to come up with better terminology. We're really we're at a disadvantage with that. But you guys understand what I mean. So we are at least communicating, if not smoothly and eloquently at this point.
And so, it's very scary. The implications of now, okay, this place that is now a source of, and I would argue too that it's a source of a lot of the black market opium. It's not necessarily going to the Pfizers and the pharmaceutical companies and the Sacklers and all that. Like, this is the stuff that's being, turned into the tar that's getting processed over the border, which is also, a large source of funding for the government that we know of. And
it's how the British subjugated China.
Yeah.
China had 1,000-year history. The British went in there and got them all addicted. It's a very powerful force in the society. And when it's artificially created these problems, like back in 1996, when they had that, I think it was in LA, they had that town meeting and they had John Deutsch from the CIA up front. And they're saying that the CIA is dealing drugs to their communities, right? And Mike Rupert stands up and he's like, I worked for you guys and you guys are doing this thing, right? Like, that had been going on. That's not the first time in history that intelligence agencies have done stuff like that to subvert groups. They did it to all these different countries before they came back and started really doing it here. MI6 took CIA out and they overthrew like 40 countries. And then they're like, dude, do you guys have it? Can you do this now? And they're like, yeah, we think we could do it. And then 9/11 comes around. And then you get the Patriot Act, and then you get this whole mutated form of America that's not really America anymore. It's just within the boundaries, but they've changed the attitudes, values, behaviors of beliefs of Americans to be in line with communism.
Yeah.
Communism's not your friend. I don't think any of the isms are really your friend.
Yeah. It's crazy, man. Like one of the things that, like Owen Benjamin does this a lot. It's really funny what he takes like really popular movies and just kind of does a breakdown, inverted it so like the bad guy is actually the good guy. Like, he's got a really powerful argument, like in Harry Potter, like Lord Voldemort found out about this little school where they were like this satanic school where they were like kidnapping kids and teaching them all this like satanic ritual magic and stuff. He was just trying to free them. You know what I mean?
Now do
like,
it with Star Wars, right?
Yeah, he does it with Star Wars. Yeah, they're just about, and so it's like the same thing. So it's like when you start to look at the history, you're like, God, wait a minute. So the Taliban, like, hold on. Are they like the good guys here? Like, what's going on here? What's going on? My brain is like not functioning. Like, I don't know. You know what I mean?
Calls are coming from inside the house. Yeah, the bad guys might be in control of your shit. You getting propagandized all the time. You don't have truthful, nutritious information or food in your environment. You might be a prisoner. And prisoners know enough that they want to break out. That's the difference between a prisoner and a slave mentality. But I think that's what, week 4 of Autonomy, that type of training. Anyway,
shout out to Autonomy season 12, baby.
Season 12 starts next Friday. If you think you're trying to grow this year and you'd like to do it around other people doing likewise, and that would help you expedite your speed and make you a juggernaut, a force to be reckoned with, then get over to getautonomy.info. I even have a website over here. If I think to click a button like this, I'll show you Clip Genie while I'm finding it. There you go, Clip Genie.
Look at that beautiful page, dude. Shout out to the Autonomy team. That was you guys that put that together.
It was. When I saw this the other night, I was like, that's pretty, because the Genie like pops through every couple frames. I was like, that's pretty snazzy. Yeah, I know. Tech team. Shout out to Martin and the tech team. All right, so here's getautonomy.info. You click one of these buttons on the page after you have satiated your concerns and you want to move forward, and it allows you to have full transparency and speak to someone who's just been through the course, so that you can get your questions answered in an expeditious, low pressure way. And there's plenty plenty to do, but you click any of the buttons on the page and it will take you to scheduling that call. Easy conversation. And I actually just had one of those easy conversations yesterday with the people over at PBD, Valuetainment, Patrick Bet-David. And that consulting that they do is like, I don't know, I'm going to find out what their offer is. I got a webinar meeting next Friday.
Dude, that's awesome, man. Foot in the door, baby.
Well, I just wanted to see, Lisa's she's been on their list and they called because I was like, dude, I don't take calls from salespeople. So because you called my wife and she told me to talk to you, I'll hear you out. And he was actually a person worth knowing and had some really interesting experience and wasn't just somebody in a call center, you know? So I was like, oh, that's kind of like how we do things. So that's cool. So yeah, I'll check it out and see. And I can always learn stuff too. I spend money on courses and mentorship and masterminds and all that good stuff too. So anyway, as we continue to grow in the light direction, we have one more clip in this block before we switch topics. So this is the EPA chief debunking the Trump Project 2025 association altogether in this forum. And I thought it was pretty spectacular, but I also thought, is this one of the people that was like the framing of when Daily Show covered Project 2025, they made it look like everybody's kooky. So I was thinking, is this one of the kooky people from the video trying to defend herself? But I don't think she was, because she's too well spoken and Daily Show wouldn't have known what to do with her, right? You can't caricature what she's about to say. So let's go to it. It comes to us from Jimmy Dore.
Hey, come see us on tour. We'll be in Tempe, Arizona, Burbank, California, and we're going to be in Honolulu, January 11th. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. So this is the former head of the EPA. Now, you think Democrats and lefty liberals would love the head of the EPA. So she went to Congress, and she was talking about Project 2025. She's the director of the Center for Energy and Conservation at Independent Women's Forum. What? You mean just women? How about ladies with penises? She is a veteran Republican climate and energy strategist, communicator, and environmental attorney. She is also a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, a principal. Previously, she served as chief of staff of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Under the leadership of Administration Andrew Wheeler, Mandy set and implemented environmental policy priorities for the Trump administration. She created and managed terms of political and career employees. So here's what she had to say about Project 2025.
I have a prepared opening statement that I'll get into in just a second, but Ranking Member Raskin, you reiterated and have created a boogeyman that just isn't there. I did author the EPA chapter on Project 2025, but in the course of that, I did not work with President Trump, with any of the people who work for him directly or his campaign. And it is very misleading to suggest that there's any coordination there, because I can personally tell you it did not happen. And I am not vying for a position in the next administration. I've actually left DC and I've moved to a small town in Mississippi where I interact every day with people who live outside this bubble of gaslighting and misleading. And they actually are dealing with the consequences caused by policy decisions of this administration that isn't defined by progress, but defined by creating unnecessary hardship. I understand why it's hard to think about the political realm prior to President Trump, but the Heritage Foundation has been very involved in pushing forward conservative policies for quite a while. And the Mandate for Leadership, the latest iteration, it's the 9th edition. This is a project that has been put out every few years since 1981. So it's been around for quite some time, and again, is more committed to representing the position of the broader conservative movement than any one candidate or person. And I understand why there is the...
So what she just said was, you guys have created a boogeyman around 2025, and Trump, for some reason, can't explain this to the American people. And you've attached Trump to it. She said, but we've been doing this every couple of years. We put out these Project 2025s. This comes from the Heritage Foundation. By the way, that's the exact same place that Barack Obama's healthcare plan came from, the Heritage Foundation. So she's saying this is what we do. I wrote that, the EPA section of 2025, what they wanted. Trump had anything to do with it. And she says you have to create a boogeyman. Of course they do. They have to create Trump to be a boogeyman, or else you'll vote for him.
Person. And I understand why there is the creation of this boogeyman, because your leading candidate is one running away from policy actions she has taken that make Americans.
So there you go. Former chair of the EPA. Hey, we do this at the Heritage Foundation all the time. We put these out every couple of years. This has got nothing to do with Trump. He didn't have anything to do with it. They all know that. Just like they know when they say, Trump has said there were good people on both sides. He said, they know that that's a lie. Because they're saying he said neo-Nazis and white supremacists were good people. That's not what he said. He denounced those same people in that same speech. If Trump is so horrible, why do they have to keep lying about him? Why do you have to keep making stuff up? It's because the establishment.
See, it's not just me. It's the dude in his garage, the comedian guy. He thinks that way too. If the guy's so guilty, why is the only evidence you ever bring out like Bergdorf Goodman bathroom from 25 years ago, or Stormy Daniels sex worker transactions through Michael Cohen, his lawyer, who was ripping him off, or you want to stack up 34 things and call it all a felony, but it's not all the same crime. And so you can't have unanimous consent unless you break the rules of the jury deliberation process in order to find him guilty during an election process. It doesn't make any sense to people who are objective thinking people.
And then, of course, the thing about good people both sides, which has actually been debunked by Snopes. Like, come on, you guys.
Yeah, I think we played the clip last week. I think that error, the error on their side is when you use deception in those cases. So they got some people to vote for Biden in 2020 because of those lies. And they continue to repeat those lies and stack onto them, right? They got this new Project 2025, but the other two lies that they repeat regularly, they come from years ago. Right. So when they're in that position, when people have voted for Biden because they thought he said very fine people, and then those people have been exposed to, like, here's the whole clip. They're now on the other side because they saw that they were being gaslit. They got out of their Stockholm syndrome and they're not going back. They're now running Operation Underground Railroad. They're going to go show that clip on TikTok. Hey, did you see this? We all got lied to. And that's a one-way ticket to the other side of Freedom Land. And they're not going back. They might go back to rescue some people, but they're not going back to the plantation. So, will truth find its audience soon enough is always the question. Because the Hunter Biden laptop being covered up in 2020, if that was not covered up, when those people found out that they had been gaslit and lied to several months later, like a large percentage said they would have voted the other way. So that changed an election outcome. And that was one of 10 things that were going on simultaneously to make sure, as Time Magazine told you, they had to control that outcome for the good of democracy. And this is a constitutional republic. So you should take that as a declaration of war for some of you out there who understand what that actually means. Because democracy is what killed Socrates. That is not the system that we adopted, and as the founding fathers in this country did not adopt the ways of Greece and Socrates. Okay, we had a more advanced, nuanced, detailed, balanced checks and balances. That only works if you have a judicial system that keeps corruption away. When you have these people coming in with a whole bunch of money and you don't pay these people much money, then they're very bribable. That's what K Street and J Street, like that, those are lobbyists who inflict their interest on your politicians more than your interest on your politicians. So I would argue at that point, even if you vote, you're disenfranchised and you don't have representation. And if you don't have if you have taxation without representation, that used to be something that people, that was like fighting words back in 1776. Today, it's absolutely fine because everybody's woke and we accept the dominance of the predatory party, right? Until we don't, because we know enough and we're like, no. And we resist in our own different ways. And that asymmetrical resistance is not something that Alexander Soros and his ilk are really prepared for. So education's the solution.
Yep, I agree, man. And I just think in either case, as both the mainstream media, the captured media continues to collapse, the so-called truthers are kind of exposing themselves a little bit too. It's like, there's so much room. I just have so much hope for like the future of podcasting and people that are actually diligently, like honestly and authentically putting out good content. You know what I mean? It's just like when all of that collapses, we'll be the ones left to kind of continue to push freedom forward,
Twice a year, I teach a course called Autonomy. It's a 12-week course. It teaches leadership, entrepreneur skills, executive skills, all these types of things that I saw were taken out of our education system in order to make the schooling or indoctrination system that we've all probably went through. And it has served us well enough to be interchangeable cogs in the machine of the globalists. But if we want a homestead, if we want write our own ticket, work from home job, work from anywhere type of situation, they're not exactly handing those out at the end of college. They give you a piece of paper and they're like, good luck. So reality is dropping us off here, but the demands of reality are up here. So I created Autonomy to help people close that gap for themselves so they can level up their skills to the demands of the situations that life is putting in front of us presently. Life's demands of intellect and understanding precision and complexity are ever increasing. The schooling didn't prepare us for it. The media is not going to do anything but reinforce what schooling prepared us for. And so we're going to have to take a leadership position and take steps off the beaten path to kind of blaze our own trail in life. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life